Welcome back to another exciting garden tour of my own garden. Now, as a gardener of almost 40 years, what I find is I go through different stages relative to the kinds of things that I like to do in my garden and the kinds of plants. Take, for instance, hydrangeas. When I first started gardening, I thought hydrangeas were nothing but a pain in the neck, especially the Asian ones. You know, Hydrangea macrophylla, the mop head and the lace caps. I always thought that they required so much more attention. They had a very narrow environmental window where if it was too much sun, especially in North Carolina, they'd fry, and if there wasn't enough sun, you wouldn't get enough flowers. Well, guess what? In the past 2 or 3 years now, I have become totally obsessed with all things hydrangea. Not only the different species and the different cultivars, but also placement in my garden and also propagation. So today's tour is all about the hydrangeas in my garden. Sit back, grab something cool to drink. It's early June here in North Carolina. We're going to go through and look at all the hydrangeas that I've got in my garden. I'll be sure to tell you some stories, and maybe when it's finished, you'll consider selecting some of these very hydrangeas for your own home garden. Okay, everybody, let's set the scene. It's June 10th, Raleigh, North Carolina, and the hydrangeas are doing their thing. This is what I'm calling Hydrangea Cove, and I'm going to give you a little tour and talk about the hydrangeas that you see here. I'm standing on my front porch. I've stepped up on a chair and I got one foot on the railing, so you can see the view that I see out my kitchen window. And if you stand on the front porch, got a number of different species and cultivars of hydrangeas there. And so I'll give you a little tour of this area and use this area to talk about the different kinds of hydrangeas. Got a couple other things I'll show you as we go along the way, and then we'll wrap it up there. But this is the view, and what I chose to do here, because of the partially shady location, is to incorporate a number of hydrangeas that actually really need partial shade to partial sun. If they get too much sun in North Carolina, you get some scorching that occurs, especially on the Asian types, the Hydrangea macrophylla, and on some of the native hydrangeas like quercifolia and arborescens. However, they can tolerate a little bit more sun. So because, and let me show you right over here, because of these two large white oak trees that I featured on the garden tour a month or so ago, those oak trees create a huge amount of shade. I've got a hemlock and some crepe myrtles in the background to block the morning sun. So it gets a little bit of morning sun, filtered sun during the day, and some late afternoon sun. So this has ultimately ended up being a perfect spot for these hydrangeas. So we're going to go down and take a look, and I'll introduce the different species of hydrangeas by showing you the ones that I've got planted in my garden, and then we'll go from there. So I've got this ring around a very small turf island. I'm using turf as a ground cover here. And then if you look down here, I've got some other hydrangeas. You can see the lavender, bluish, purple, and pink right there. And we'll talk about those as well. So I'm pretty excited about all the different types. And in fact, I've got some that I'm propagating this year, and I'll show you some that I propagated last year. All right, I'm gonna try not to fall as I get down off my perch here. And so you can see this is the front porch from which I was shooting this. So we'll come down and we'll start talking about the different types of hydrangeas. Now, when it comes to the hydrangeas, you've got about 5 or 6 different species that are very important to consider and that you can use in your landscape. The first one is one of my favorites, and as I mentioned in the intro, I've just gone bonkers over them, and that's the Hydrangea quercifolia, the Oakleaf Hydrangea. And that's characterized by that guy right there that you see in the background. Now, Oakleaf Hydrangea is a native shrub to the United States, the eastern seaboard, and it's a shrub that'll grow. As you can see here, this is about 7 or 8 feet and about 8 or 9 feet wide. This species here just really loves its spot. Now, Oakleaf Hydrangea, like I said, partial sun, flowers about the middle to end of May into June, and those panicle-shaped white flowers that you see are a wonderful attractant to insects, to pollinators. Now, a little bit about hydrangea flowers. Hydrangea flowers generally, and most hydrangeas, are made up of 2 different kinds of flowers. The most showy part is the sterile flower. Now, the sterile flowers have petals, but they don't contain any of the the sexual parts of the flower, the pistil and the stamen. And so therefore the insects aren't too terribly attracted to them because they don't get much nectar from those flowers. But if you look deep inside, you can see there are other flowers that aren't very showy, but they do contain the sexual parts, the pistils and the stamen, and that's where the insects go to get nectar and ultimately pollinate the flower. So the Oakleaf Hydrangea is a great native species. Keep in mind that the deer will tend to graze on it if you have a deer situation. In fact, I use some of the Oakleaf Hydrangea out in the woods behind my house to actually entice the deer to stay out there and eat and not come into my property. So that's kind of a cool thing. And the other thing about the oak leaves is there are a number of different cultivars, dwarf cultivars, cultivars where the flower comes out and instead of turning a cream color after white and then brown, they turn kind of a cream color and then they go pink, which is really quite unique. There's one called Ruby Slippers. I've got it down on down at the front of my driveway as you enter into the property. But so Oakleaf Hydrangea, its other claim to fame is just these wonderful big giant, take a look at these, big giant oak-shaped leaves, henceforth the name Oakleaf Hydrangea and Hydrangea quercifolia. And then if they do get enough sun during the year, they'll turn a bright red color in the fall. You get some great fall color from this plant. I've really fallen in love with the oak leaves, and I've got a lot of different cultivars. And I've got it here planted. You can see in this little cove area, there's some small flowering gardenia, and then over here by the driveway side, some aucuba, some different types of aucuba, which are all shade loving and do well in dry shade. Okay, so that's quercifolia. The next species is probably the most well-known species and most used is Hydrangea macrophylla, the mop head and the lace cap hydrangea. It's an Asian descent. It's that classic hydrangea that produces those big mop head flowers. Now the one you're looking at right there is one called Endless Summer. The cultivar name is Ballimer, but the trademark name is Endless Summer, and that's what's happening a lot. Excuse me. That's what's happening a lot. You're getting this this trademark naming of plants rather than the cultivar, and that can create a little bit of confusion, but way more marketable. Endless Summer is way more marketable than, say, Ballimer. But these are your classic hydrangeas. They're the ones that, you know, they'll grow about 4 to 6 feet tall, spread out equally as much, and then right about the end of May, beginning of June, at least in North Carolina, the end of May, they'll produce the large mop head flowers. Now, Hydrangea macrophylla has hundreds and hundreds of cultivars, and I can't begin to go into all of those cultivars. There's just so many. I'll highlight a few of the ones that I have, but they have two different types of flowers. If you look at the flowers here, okay, you can see that it's a mop head. That's the description of the flower. I'm going to put my hand in here, and you can see that the flower head is just this big bundle of sterile flowers. Now, deep inside, and this is where the macrophylla types don't necessarily attract as many insects, you can see some of the fertile flowers right in there. But for the most part, the flowers are sterile mop head. The other kind of macrophylla type is called lace cap. And I got a couple of those, and I'll share a few of those with you. But so here's here's Endless Summer, and its claim to fame is that it's going to produce flower buds and flowers all season long. But its biggest flowering event, like most of macrophylla, is right now. And now if you look, you can see there are some flowers that are just starting to color up. So they open up like this. And then others are just buds. You see, like right there. Now I've got another cultivar here that I pruned. Well, it got kind of killed back this past spring, and so as a result, it doesn't have any flowers. And then one of my favorite cultivars, and I'll try to include a photograph for you, is this one right here. This is Hydrangea macrophylla Oregon Pride, and oh gosh, the flower comes out pink, then it turns lavender, and then purple, and it has multicolored flower heads, and really excited. There's a cultivar that has yellow leaves called Lemon Daddy. And there's Lemon Daddy. It's kind of small right there because I just took a bunch of cuttings I'm going to try to propagate. Lemon Daddy is probably more selected for its foliage than it is for its flowers. Now, when it comes to hydrangea, consider this. The macrophylla types flower on last year's plant growth, on last year's stems, okay? That says they flower on old wood. So when you prune hydrangea macrophylla, you have to wait until after it's flowered before you prune it. Otherwise, if you prune it in the early spring, you'll lose all the flower buds that are being formed. So remember, macrophylla prune after flowering. That would be during the summer sometime. That's the same for hydrangea quercifolia, the oak leaf. It flowers on old wood too. So the time you want to prune that would be after it flowers. Now, you can wait until those flowers fade and almost start turning brown. Or you can, if you don't need to prune it, you can leave those flowers on there and they turn brown. They develop a unique ornamental feature in and of itself, and then the red fall color. But that's the pruning scheme for those. All right. Now this next group, which has quickly become one of my favorites, and that's the smooth hydrangeas, Hydrangea arborescens, Hydrangea arborescens. And perhaps for at least 20, 30 years, the standard Hydrangea arborescens, which by the way is a native to the eastern seaboard. It tolerates partial sun, further north even full sun. I've seen in coastal Maine Botanic Garden up in Maine, I've seen these plants planted in full sun and they thrive. In North Carolina, they're going to require a little bit of shade so that they don't, have trouble with moisture in the summertime. It just gets, the heat load is so great that they'll wilt out and you may get some scorch. But the cultivar that's been used for years is Hydrangea arborescens Annabelle, the Annabelle hydrangea. It grows about 3 to 5 feet tall, maybe 6 feet tall, spreads out equally with huge white flower heads, mop heads, flowers. And up until about 5-7 years ago, that was about the only cultivar that was used. There wasn't even a pink or a red cultivar available. Well, my colleague and friend Tom Rainey at NC State University at the Mountain Horticultural Crops Research Station has spent many, many years breeding new cultivars of Hydrangea arborescens. And luckily for me, Tom provided me with some, and I've been able to include them in the Hydrangea Cove and elsewhere in my garden. So let's look at the different cultivars of Hydrangea arborescens. One of the first ones that Tom introduced was a pink flowering cultivar, which was revolutionary, and he called it Invincibelle Spirit. Hydrangea arborescens Invincibelle Spirit. And you can see the plant grows about 4.5 feet tall, and it produces these beautiful, beautiful pink flower heads. Okay, you see them there, and all over the plant. Now, Invincibelle Spirit, when it was first introduced, was the only pink, and it got a little bit tall and it tended to flop, where we get a good heavy rain and those stems fall down without support. And so Tom improved Invincibelle Spirit and introduced Invincibelle Spirit 2, and that's the one you're looking at here. You first saw down by the end of my driveway Invincibelle Spirit, but here's Invincibelle Spirit 2, and sure enough, the stems are quite stiff. You get nice flowering. You can see some buds coming right there. And here's the great news about this pink flowering hydrangea. For every one of the Invincibelle Spirits that's sold, a $1 donation goes to breast cancer research. So I think that's just fantastic, and way over $1 million has been raised already. So that was one of many that Tom released. Then comes along some of the refined white cultivars of arborescens. Here's one, this first one I want to show you is called Limelight. And Limelight is unique in that it's got these huge, huge white flower heads. But when they slowly emerge earlier in the month, when they slowly emerge, the flower heads start out almost lime green. And it may be difficult for me to show you here, but you can actually see, there we go, you can see that lime green color, and then as it gets bigger, it gets more white. Now this right now is about waist high on me, and this is the 3rd year that it's been growing. I do cut it back. Now here's the cool thing about arborescens. Arborescens flowers on new wood, on this year's wood. And so that means that in the early spring, if you want to prune it to control size or shape it a little bit, you can prune it then and you're still going to get a flowering effect like this on Limetta. Now right next to it, you can see how more compact this is. This is Hydrangea arborescens Wee White, W-E-E-W-H-I-T-E. And Wee White is a dwarf version of Annabelle, if you will. It's smaller, it doesn't get, the stems don't get as long, it's self-contained, but yet it still produces those huge, huge flower heads. I mean, look at this, look at the size of these things. They're immense. It's just fantastic. And so that one is one of my favorites, Wee White, because it's so self-contained, to use the word self-contained. Now, this one may be one of the most popular and probably will be in the future because of the color. There's never been a red, if you will, as red as you're going to get close to, Hydrangea arborescens. But here's Invincibelle Ruby. Invincibelle Ruby, and Ruby is it's an arborescens, grows about the same height, 3.5 to 5 feet, spread, partial shade, partial sun, just like all of them. But instead it produces what I would consider a dark pink to a light red flower. And you can see how the flower heads are good and large and profuse. I mean, look at all those flowers all over. So when I got a hold of these plants, they were in little 4-inch pots the year before last, and I put them in this area. My goal was to create this, to kind of enhance this hydrangea planting. And so I've got 1, 2, 3, about 4 of them planted right in this area, and you can see how they kind of create this margin around the turf. And then as you come over here, you might be saying, well, wait a minute, what's that one there that's even more almost mauve colored? Well, this is one of the other new ones that Tom came out with, and this is Hydrangea arborescens Invincibelle Mini Mauvette. So think about it, it's dwarf and it has mauve colored flowers. The one thing I have noticed is that it comes out the latest of the different Invincibelles that I'm growing in my garden. You can see these are all fully out. Mini Mauvette right now is just starting to show its deep, rich mauve color. There, you can see it there. The other thing I love about Mini Mauvette are the leaves. Look at the leaves with the serrated, almost dentate margin, round, good sized leaves that go along. They go along with these great flowers. So that's Hydrangea arborescens. I've just gone crazy over those. I just keep, I've propagated Annabelle, and I've got Annabelle, going in a number of other different places in my garden. All right, perhaps the one of the hydrangeas that's not as well known is Hydrangea serrata. It's an Asian species of hydrangea, and it's called Mountain Hydrangea. It grows a little bit smaller. The leaves are a little bit smaller. Everything about this plant is a little bit more understated, but it's got some versatility in the landscape. The one on the left is a pink flowering cultivar of serrata, and if we get close, you'll see it grows about 3.5 feet tall. Let's take a close-up of the flowers. Almost a double sterile flower, and then the fertile flowers are in the middle. This is resembling the lace cap version of macrophylla, which I'll show you in just a second. But you can see the leaves are a little bit understated. They're a little bit smaller compared to, say, the macrophylla types or even the arborescens types. But then here is Hydrangea serrata O Amacha Nishiki. That's the cultivar name. You can see it on the screen. O Amacha Nishiki. Now I gotta think that O Amacha Nishiki means, oh my gosh, look at the foliage, because look at the foliage. It's variegated with splotches of yellow. And then if you look closely, you can see that it has these petioles that go into the vein that are a burgundy color. Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. And then the flower is a little bit less obvious, but they're a lace cap flower, kind of pink, All right, not as many on the plant, but this plant I think has great potential for shady locations where you want to pop it with some variegated foliage color. So that's Hydrangea serrata. All right, so there we go. And just to give you a little span from one area around. And you know, as I'm doing this, just y'all think about places inside your home where you tend to look out the windows a lot, whether you have a sunroom or kitchen window, that type of thing, and think about how you might arrange the landscape to make that site more pleasing. We call that a sight line, and I talked about that in the garden tour from about a month ago. And then I've got some perennials over here. There's a red cutleaf Japanese maple called Tamukiyama, but this is one of my favorite herbaceous perennials. This guy right here is Sun King Aurelia Sun King, and it is an herbaceous perennial, grows about 3 to 5 feet tall, produces white flowers. It's an Aurelia. All right, I don't even care about the flowers. This cultivar Sun King is selected because of its incredible yellow foliage, and like I said, it gets waist high, a little bit taller, equally as wide. I've seen it growing on the eastern seaboard of the United States, all the way up as far north as coastal Maine Botanic Garden in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, and as far south as South Carolina. The further south you go, you got to give it a little bit more shade. If you plant Aurelia Sun King in full sun in North Carolina, you're probably going to get a little bit of scorch. You may get more flowers, but you'll get some foliage that looks a little bit almost bleached out. So a partially shady location, partially sunny location is going to be way more conducive for this plant. So that's kind of cool. It's going to fill that space. It's planted next to a winter Daphne as well. And then before we talk about the other hydrangea macrophyllas, here's coal miner Colocasia. Coal miner I planted last year in this spot, 1 4-inch pot I planted in middle of May, and it has grown up, spreads. It spreads by underground stems called rhizomes and produces new plants at its tip. So for those of you who like to propagate plants, holy smokes, here's a great plant to grow, to dig these up, pot them up, and give them to your friends and relatives, other gardener friends. But that's the good news. The bad news is you got to be careful with this plant because as you can see, it may spread in places where you don't want it to. So my recommendation is that you put it in a pretty good sized pot, put a saucer in the pot because they're pretty heavy drinkers, and then place the pot in the landscape somewhere so as to prevent this spreading if that's a concern for yours. You might be saying, well, how come it's not for you? Because I'm going to dig all these guys up and share them with other people. So coal miner, you can see why it's called coal miner. The leaf is looks like it's been dusted with coal, and then the margin, the veins of the leaf show that light green. So it's really quite ornamental and beautiful. And in zone 7, it's hardy. I didn't do anything to protect this plant, and lo and behold, there it is. And so that's Colocasia coal miner. Now, the lace cap Hydrangea macrophyllas, I've got 2 of them right here. These are 2 of my favorites. They're planted side by side. The one on the left is, let's come over here there we go. The one on the left is called Twist and Shout. Now, lace cap hydrangeas have a little bit different flower. Take a look at the flower. You can see that the sterile flowers, oh, I got an ant on there we go. Sterile flowers radiate around the outside of the flower, and then the fertile flowers all open up on the inside and actually are quite colorful. So here's one that's opened up. If you look at this one, you can see the flowers, the fertile flowers haven't yet opened up. Big leaves with serrated margins, but check out the lace cap. Twist and Shout is the name. And notice the variability in color. If you look over to the right, you'll see blue, then you'll see some purple, and even some shades of pink. Look down right here. You can see some shades of pink. And that's all just as a result of the slight differences that you might find in the pH of the soil. Traditionally, hydrangeas, not all hydrangeas, but the standard old-fashioned hydrangeas responded to the pH, the soil acidity, to the degree where If you had a pretty acidic soil, then your flowers would tend to migrate toward the blue side. If you have a somewhat more basic, they migrate toward the pink. You can influence that by, trying to adjust the pH with lime to raise the pH and ammonium sulfate to lower the pH, or aluminum sulfate to lower the pH as well. So that's Twist and Shout. It's a great cultivar. And then right next to it, whoa, sorry about that. Right next to it, I have one that you might say, well, it's exactly the same thing. It's not. It looks just like it. Color-wise, it's very similar. But check this out. This is called Edgy Orbits. So it's a lace cap type, but the sterile flowers sometimes can be double, but notice the edge of the petals, they're white, okay? They're white, and so that's what distinguishes Edgy Orbits from Twist and Shout. It gives you that unique white edging that goes around the outside of the flowers. So those are the two, both, oh gosh, maybe about 5-6 feet tall. These have been in for about 10 years. They're about 4.5, 5 feet tall. And then right next to it is a hydrangea called Hydrangea paniculata. And we'll finish the video today talking about Hydrangea paniculata. But if you look at it, you can see that it's not flowering right now. So this is a later summer, a July flowering hydrangea, big giant panicles. Oh, here we go. I'm excited. Look at this. Look at this here at the there you go. That's the beginning of the panicle flower. Now it'll be a white upside down ice cream cone. That'll be about anywhere from 6 to 8 inches tall all over. A third of the flowers will be sterile and the rest will be fertile. And this will be covered with insects late in the afternoon in the dead of summer. So this plant grows about 6 to 8 feet tall and produces those flowers. Just absolutely love it. This one's called Brussels Lace. That's the cultivar. You can get lots of different cultivars. One of my favorites is called Limelight, because the flowers come out green and then turn white. Hydrangea paniculata. Here's the deal with these. Full sun, they grow tall, they bloom on this year's wood, so you can prune these. So you've got some choices. You've got some great choices with these hydrangeas to use them in the garden with each other and in combinations with other plants. Remember, macrophylla, quercifolia, all right, and serrata, those are all going to bloom on old wood, so you prune them after they flower. And then arborescens and paniculata, they flower on new wood, and so you can prune them in the early spring. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this, and if you're a subscriber to the YouTube channel, please, if you have questions or comments you want to make, I'd love to hear from you. I'm going to actually do a part 2 video relative to hydrangeas. I'll take you in the backyard, show you a couple things, and then show you what I've done to propagate them, because hydrangeas are pretty easy to propagate, and I'd love to share with you how you can do it at home just by using some very, very simple things. You don't need to have a greenhouse or a mist system, and we'll go from there. So look forward to seeing you in that next video, and I hope you've enjoyed this one. Check out these hydrangeas at your local garden centers. Maybe you'll pick a few up, plant them in your own garden. So until next time, I'll be looking for you. You know where, in the garden.